welcome back to whispers in the dark. Turn down the lights if you can. Let the room feel a little too quiet. Tonight, you are going to hear a story about a small object that fits in the palm of a hand and leaves the rest of your life too heavy to lift. Settle in and now listen. It began in a small English house on a night so wet and persistent that it seemed the whole world was being erased by water and rewritten in mud. The wind kept leaning into the chimney like a man trying to overhear a private conversation. The rain came in sheets that slapped the windows, then slid downward in long, trembling lines, as if the glass itself were sweating fear. Inside, the lamp light made a warm puddle on the tablecloth. It was the sort of light that forgives everything. It made the worn corners of the room look quaint instead of tired. It made the kettle's hiss sound cozy instead of anxious. In that soft circle sat Mr. White, a man with quick hands and a habit of playing with small things. His son Herbert lounged with that careless confidence young men wear before they learn what the world can do to them. And Mrs. White moved between them and the hearth like the heart of the house. Her sleeves rolled up, her face brightened by the simple act of keeping her family warm. Outside, the wind slammed the gate again and again. Herbert grinned and said it sounded like someone desperate to be let in. Mr. White laughed and answered a thought with another thought. He had been thinking of chess. His mind liked games. He asked Herbert if he would play. They set up the pieces, and almost immediately Mr. White's concentration narrowed into that pleasant frown of someone who believes the world can be controlled by careful moves. The fire snapped. The kettle shuddered on its trivet. Mrs. White poured tea into cups and listened to the rain and to the faint, distant sound of boots on the path. Then the knock came. It was not the loud, desperate hammering of a stranger. It was firm, familiar. 3 knocks that said, without words, "I am expected." Mrs. White's face lit with recognition. She hurried to the door, and in a gust of cold, wet air, Sergeant Major Morris stepped into the room. He brought the smell of far places with him, not the romantic smell of adventure that boys imagine, but the stale iron scent of uniforms worn too long, the dust of roads that never truly wash off, the faint bitterness of smoke that clings to a man who has seen villages burn. He was broad-shouldered and older than Mr. White remembered, though perhaps it was not age that weighed him down. It was something behind his eyes that did not belong in a comfortable English parlor. They greeted him with the kind of joy that comes from old friends and from the relief of proving that time has not stolen everything. They fed him. They warmed him. They asked about India, and he spoke of it with a flatness that made the word sound like a wound. Herbert leaned forward, hungry for stories. Mrs. White listened with that cautious politeness of someone who senses that some memories should not be stirred. The evening moved along in the rhythm of tea and laughter and the steady percussion of rain. The chessboard sat abandoned, the pieces frozen mid-game. The fire blazed higher, as if trying to burn away the chill that Sergeant Major Morris had carried in with him. At last, when the plates had been cleared, and the night had deepened into a thick black thing pressed against the windows, Morris reached into his pocket. His hand hesitated there. That hesitation was the first true horror, though none of them recognized it yet. A man does not hesitate before giving a harmless gift. A man hesitates when he is about to place something living in your home. He withdrew a small object and set it on the table. It was a monkey's paw, not a charming trinket, not a novelty for a mantle. It was dried and shrunken, the flesh drawn tight over tiny bones, the fingers curled as if it had died mid-grasp. The skin was the color of old parchment that has been handled too many times. In the lamplight, it looked almost wet, though it was brittle. It lay there like a piece of something that should have stayed buried. Herbert made a face and laughed in the way young men do when something unsettles them. Mr. White leaned closer, curious. Mrs. White's expression tightened, her eyes flicking from Morris's face to the paw and back again, as if she expected it to move. Morris did not smile. He stirred his tea and watched the paw as though it were a coal that might pop. Mr. White asked what it was. Herbert asked where he got it. Mrs. White asked, carefully, what on earth he had brought into their home. Morris said it was exactly what it looked like, a monkey's paw. He told them it came from India. And then, like a man reciting something he wished he could forget, he told them the story attached to it. An old fakir, he said, had placed a spell on it. The fakir wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who tried to interfere with it did so to their sorrow. The paw would grant 3 wishes to 3 separate men. 3 wishes each. 9 chances for human desire to collide with whatever the world truly is. Herbert's eyes gleamed with delighted disbelief. Mr. White's curiosity sharpened. Mrs. White's fingers tightened around her cup. Morris said he had had his 3 wishes. When he said it, the room felt suddenly smaller. The wind outside seemed to lean closer. The fire gave a low, restless murmur. Herbert asked what the wishes were. Morris would not say. Not directly. He spoke instead of the second man who had owned the paw before him, a man who had wished himself dead. He said it as if the words were too heavy to carry. He said it as if the air might punish him for speaking it aloud. Mrs. White gave a little involuntary sound. Mr. White asked, with a nervous laugh, why Morris still had it if it was so terrible. Morris's jaw worked, as if he chewed on the memory. He said he did not know. He said he had meant to throw it away more times than he could count. He said the thing about certain objects is that they do not leave your life easily. Sometimes they leave by entering someone else. Herbert asked to see it. Mr. White, already reaching, took it up between finger and thumb. It felt wrong in his hand. He would later try to describe it, and he would fail, because wrongness is not a texture you can explain. It was light, too light, It had the brittle dryness of something long dead, and yet, held in the warmth of his palm, it seemed to resist that warmth like stone. Morris's eyes snapped to Mr. White's hand. He said sharply, "Put it down." Mr. White startled and set it back on the table. Herbert laughed again, but his laughter was thinner now, like paper. Morris drank his tea quickly, as if he wanted to keep his mouth busy so he would not say too much. Mr. White asked how it worked. Morris said you simply held it and spoke your wish aloud. Mr. White's eyes shone with a childish spark. He asked if it could really give wishes. Morris did not answer yes. He did not answer no. He said, in a voice that sounded scraped raw, "It did for me." Then he reached across the table, seized the paw in his own hand, and moved toward the fire. In the bright mouth of the hearth, the paw looked suddenly obscene. A small dead hand offered to the flames. Herbert's chair scraped back. Mrs. White's breath caught. Mr. White stood as well, one hand half raised, as if to stop Morris. Morris hesitated. Again that hesitation. Then he tossed it into the fire. The paw landed among the coals with a soft sound, almost like a sigh. For a moment, they all watched it. The fire licked at it. The curled fingers cast tiny warped shadows. Mr. White stepped forward with startling speed. He thrust his hand into the hearth, ignoring the heat, and snatched the paw back out. He shook it, and flakes of ash drifted away. He held it, panting, as if he had rescued a living creature. Morris stared at him with a look that held anger and something like pity. "If you are going to keep it," Morris said, "then listen to me. Make your wishes sensible, and do not blame me for what happens." Herbert, trying to make the moment lighter, said perhaps they could wish for £200 to pay off the mortgage, and then see what came of it. Morris's mouth tightened. He said nothing. Mr. White asked if Morris would take it back. Morris refused. He stood. He put on his coat. The rain had not stopped. The wind flung spray against the window panes. At the door, Morris paused. He looked at them like a man looking at people on a platform as his train pulls away, like he wants to call out a warning, but knows the warning will not be believed. Then he left. His boots vanished down the path. The gate slammed once. The house settled back into its quiet, but the quiet was no longer the comfortable kind. It was the quiet of a room after someone has spoken of death. Mr. White turned the monkey's paw over and over in his fingers. Herbert watched him. Mrs. White watched them both. "It is only a piece of dried paw," Herbert said, attempting a grin. "It cannot do anything. It is only a story soldiers tell to scare each other." But when he said it, the fire popped, and a coal rolled, and the sound made Herbert flinch. Later, when they were ready for bed, Mr. White tucked the paw into his pocket as if it were a coin. Mrs. White scolded him gently. Herbert teased him. Mr. White laughed and said it was only for curiosity. They slept, or rather, they lay in their beds with sleep circling them, but never quite landing. Mr. White dreamed of a road that twisted through fog. He dreamed of reaching for something he could not see. He woke with his hand clenched. In the morning, the world looked ordinary again. Gray light seeped through the curtains. The rain had moved on, leaving the garden soaked and shining. Herbert went to work at the factory, whistling as he buttoned his coat. Mrs. White cleaned and hummed and tried to chase away the uneasy feeling in her chest. Mr. White read the paper and told himself the paw was nonsense. At breakfast, Herbert joked about wishing. "Go on, father," he said. "Make the wish. £200, that is all. Let us see if a fakir's curse can pay a mortgage." Mr. White's fingers crept into his pocket. He drew out the paw and placed it on the table. In daylight, it looked even smaller, more pathetic, like a cruel joke someone had forgotten to remove. Mrs. White stared at it. She tried to laugh, but the sound did not come. She said, "If you do, it will only be for the money, yes." Mr. White nodded, smiling too widely. He said it would be a harmless experiment, nothing more. He picked up the paw. The moment it touched his skin, he felt again that wrongness, that stubborn refusal to be merely dead. He looked at his wife and son. Herbert's smile was bright and expectant. Mrs. White's face was pale with worry. Mr. White cleared his throat. He said, "I wish for £200. As the words left his mouth, the paw twitched. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible. A curling, as if one finger had tightened. But Mr. White felt it. He jerked his hand back and dropped the paw to the table. His heart hammered. Herbert's laughter burst out, loud and startled. "Did it move, father?" Mr. White tried to laugh too. He said it must have been his imagination. But his fingers tingled. His palm burned as if he had held something hot. Mrs. White reached across the table and pushed the paw away from her with the tip of one finger. The day went on. Mr. White kept expecting something. He listened too closely for footsteps outside. He watched the postman. He jumped at the sound of the gate. By afternoon, he began to feel foolish. He scolded himself for behaving like a child. Herbert would return from work. They would laugh about this tonight. Morris would visit again someday, and they would tell him how ridiculous it all was. Evening came. The lamp lit the room. Mrs. White stirred stew on the stove. Mr. White sat by the fire with the paper, not reading it. He found himself glancing again and again at the monkey's paw, where it lay in the drawer of a side table, wrapped in cloth, as if that could keep it quiet. The sound of the gate came. Mr. White's breath caught. Mrs. White looked up from her pot, ladle suspended. The wind pushed the gate. It slammed. Then silence. Mr. White forced himself to breathe. He told himself it was only the wind. Then came the knock at the door. 3 knocks, firm, expected. Mrs. White wiped her hands and went to answer. Mr. White rose slowly, his chair scraping. He felt an odd tightness in his throat. When Mrs. White opened the door, the cold air rushed in, and with it stepped a man in a dark coat, rain beating on his shoulders. He held his hat in both hands. His face was serious, composed, and careful in the way of someone delivering practiced words. He asked if Mr. White lived here. Mr. White said yes. His voice sounded far away. The man introduced himself as a representative of Ma and Megan's, Herbert's workplace. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Mrs. White's hand went to her throat. Mr. White heard, with strange detachment, the ticking of the clock, the crackle of the fire, the distant drip of water from the eaves. The man said there had been an accident. He said it with a gentleness that somehow made it worse, as if he expected them to break and was trying to cushion the fall. He said Herbert had been caught in the machinery. He did not say mangled. He did not say crushed. He did not say the thing that Mr. White's mind immediately painted in unbearable detail. He said only that Herbert was caught and that he had been killed. Mrs. White made a sound that did not seem human. It was small and strangled, as if her body tried to swallow the scream and failed. Mr. White stood as if nailed to the floor. He saw his son's grin from that morning. He saw Herbert's hands buttoning his coat. He saw Herbert's face lit by lamp light as he joked about wishes. He tried to reconcile that living boy with the words killed and accident and machinery, and his mind refused. It simply refused. The man kept speaking, because he had been trained to speak in these moments. He said the company accepted responsibility. He said they would do what they could. He said there would be some compensation. Mr. White heard the words, but did not understand them until the man finally said the amount. 200 pounds. It landed in the room like a stone dropped in a bowl of water. The ripples touched every corner. Mrs. White turned her head slowly, like an owl. She looked at Mr. White. In her eyes was horror, not only of her son's death, but of the impossible, cruel arithmetic that had followed it. Mr. White's legs went weak. He reached for the mantle and gripped it so hard his knuckles whitened. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The man, still holding his hat, looked uncomfortable. He said he was sorry. He said he would leave them now. He moved toward the door. Mrs. White did not stop him. She could not. Her body seemed to have forgotten how to move. The door closed, the latch clicked, and the house filled with a silence so vast that the crackle of the fire sounded like shouting. Mr. White sank into his chair. He stared at his hands. He could not stop seeing the paw, curled like a dead spider, and his own lips forming the wish. Mrs. White stood very still. Then she made a sound again, and this one was a sob that tore upward through her chest, as if she were being ripped open from the inside. She collapsed onto the floor and rocked, her hands clutching the air. Mr. White did not go to her at first. He sat frozen, as if any movement would make the truth more real. he finally knelt beside her, she clung to him with desperate strength. Her hair came loose. Her face was wet and twisted. Her words broke into pieces. "My boy," she whispered, "my Herbert." The days that followed were not a blur. They were sharp. Every hour cut. The house smelled of lilies and damp wool. The neighbors spoke in hushed tones. People brought food that went untouched. The parlor filled with the presence of absence. Mr. White moved through it as if underwater. He signed papers. He nodded at condolences. He stared at the coffin and understood, in a numb, abstract way, that his son was inside. And in another part of his mind, he refused to imagine what inside looked like after machinery had taken hold of a body. Mrs. White's grief was louder. It made the walls tremble. She wept until her eyes swelled. She wandered into Herbert's room and touched his things and cried as if she could soak him back into being. At night, she would wake with a gasp, calling his name, reaching into the dark like a drowning person. Mr. White tried to be steady, but steadiness is a thin plank over a deep well. Sometimes he would glance at the side table drawer where the monkey's paw lay wrapped, and nausea would roll through him. On the third night after the funeral, Mrs. White sat upright in bed with a suddenness that made Mr. White startle. Her eyes were wide. Her breathing was quick. Her hair clung to her temples with sweat. Mr. White asked what was wrong. She said, in a voice that shook with something beyond grief, "The paw." Mr. White's stomach dropped. He said no. He said he would not. He said it was done. Mrs. White grabbed his arm hard enough to hurt. She said they had 2 wishes left. Mr. White tried to pull away. He said they had paid for the first wish, paid too much. He said he would not pay again. Mrs. White's face twisted. She said, "What is there left to lose?" Her words were a cold, simple truth. The house without Herbert felt like a shell. The days stretched bleak and identical. The future had been torn away. Their lives were already ruined. What else could the paw take? Mr. White said softly, "It might bring him back wrong." Mrs. White's eyes flashed. She said, "I do not care. I want my boy." Mr. White remembered Morris's warning. He remembered the story of the man who wished himself dead. He remembered the way Morris had thrown the paw into the fire and the way he had snatched it back out. He remembered, with a sudden sick clarity, the representative of Ma and Megan's saying, caught in the machinery. Mrs. White sat very still and spoke carefully, as if shaping the argument could shape reality. She said Herbert had only been dead 3 days. She said he could come home. She said she could hear his footsteps on the stairs again. She said she could smell his hair when she hugged him. She said she could feed him and scold him and watch him laugh. She said the world had made a mistake, and perhaps the paw could undo it. Mr. White's throat tightened. He pictured Herbert's coffin. He pictured the earth piled on top. He pictured the cold, dark weight pressing down. He pictured what 3 days might do to flesh. He tried to push the image away, but grief kept dragging it back because grief is not polite. Grief does not avoid ugliness. Mrs. White leaned forward. Her eyes were wild, shining. She whispered, "Wish him alive again." Mr. White's hands shook. He said he could not. Mrs. White's voice rose. She sounded almost angry now, as if anger could bully the universe. She said he had made the first wish so easily. She said he had played with it like a toy. She said now he had to fix what he had done. Mr. White tried to speak, but his mouth was dry. He realized he had been holding his breath. Finally, with the numb despair of a man stepping off a cliff, he got out of bed. He went to the side table. The drawer made a soft scrape as it opened. The wrapped cloth lay inside. For a moment, he simply looked at it, as if refusing to touch it could keep him safe. Behind him, Mrs. White's breathing was a quick, impatient sound. Mr. White unwrapped the cloth. The monkey's paw lay there, curled and awful. In the dim light, it looked darker than before, as if the first wish had fed it, or as if it had absorbed something from Herbert. Mr. White picked it up. It was colder than his skin. He felt the chill seep into his palm. Mrs. White stood behind him now. Her voice was low, urgent, trembling with hope that felt like madness. "Do it," she whispered. "Bring him back." Mr. White's lips moved. He tried to form the words. His mind rebelled. The images were too strong. Herbert's bright living face. Herbert's body caught in machinery. Herbert in a coffin. Herbert under earth. He wanted to weep. He wanted to scream. Instead, he spoke, because his wife's grief pressed against his back like hands pushing him forward. He said, "I wish my son alive again." As the words fell into the air, the paw tightened. This time the movement was unmistakable. One withered finger straightened, slowly, painfully, as if bone and tendon still remembered what it meant to obey. Mr. White gave a cry and dropped it. The paw landed on the floorboards with a dull tap and lay there. One finger extended, pointing nowhere and everywhere at once. Mrs. White gasped, not with fear, but with relief. She fell to her knees and seized Mr. White's hands. "It worked," she whispered. "It worked." Mr. White could not answer. He stared at the paw on the floor. He felt the room sway again, as if reality had loosened. They did not sleep. They sat together in the bed, listening, waiting. The hours crawled. The clock ticked loud as a hammer. The wind outside had calmed, but the night felt heavy, like a lid. Mrs. White whispered prayers. Mr. White sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the door, on the window, on the shadowed corners of the room where the dark pooled thickest. At last, somewhere in the deep night, when the world should have been at its quietest, a sound came. It was faint at first, a soft thud from far away. Mr. White's head snapped up. Mrs. White's breath caught. Another thud. It was coming from outside. It was the sound of something heavy moving along the path to the house. Slow, uneven, like a man walking badly. Mrs. White's face transformed. Hope bloomed so bright it looked like joy. She clutched Mr. White's arm. "Do you hear?" she whispered. "He is coming." Mr. White's stomach turned to ice. He heard it too, the dragging step, the pause, the faint shuffle. It did not sound like Herbert's quick, confident stride. It sounded like a body remembering how to move after forgetting. The sound stopped. A moment of silence. Then came the knock. It was not 3 firm knocks. It was a slow, heavy pounding that shook the door. The wood groaned. Mrs. White sprang from the bed. Mr. White grabbed for her, but she pulled free like a woman possessed. She ran from the room, her bare feet slapping the stairs, her nightdress fluttering behind her. Mr. White followed, heart hammering. His legs felt thick, uncooperative. The house seemed stretched, the hallway too long, the stairs too steep. Downstairs the knocking came again, louder, more desperate. The door trembled in its frame. Dust fell from the lintel. Mrs. White's voice rang out, high and ecstatic. "Herbert," she cried. "Herbert, my boy." Mr. White reached the bottom of the stairs and saw her at the door, fumbling with the bolts. Her hands shook too hard to manage them. The knocking came again, and this time it was accompanied by a sound that made Mr. White's blood run cold. A low, wet, rasping breath, as if someone outside tried to inhale through a mouth full of dirt. Mr. White's mind flashed with a vision of the grave. The earth scraped away. The coffin lid splintered. Fingernails torn. A body forcing itself upward through soil. A body that had been dead 3 days. A body that had been caught in machinery. The company man had been careful with his words. But careful words do not change what happened. Mr. White saw, in his mind, what might now be standing on the doorstep. Not Herbert as he had been, laughing by the fire, teasing his father. Something else. Something wearing the idea of Herbert the way a corpse wears clothes. Mrs. White cried again, laughing and sobbing at once. She got one bolt undone, then another. Mr. White shouted her name. His voice sounded strange, cracked. He lunged forward, grabbing her shoulders. "Stop," he gasped. "Stop." She turned on him with fury. Her face was wild. Her eyes were fever bright. "Let me in," she screamed at the door, as if Herbert were the one locked out and she were the one with the key. "Let me in." The knocking came again, so hard the door rattled. The wood gave a low moan. The latch shook. Mr. White's hands slipped. Mrs. White tore free again and attacked the last bolt. It stuck. She clawed at it, crying out in frustration, her fingernails scraping the metal. Outside, the thing knocked again. This time the knock was slower, as if the knuckles were soft, as if the hand that struck the wood had been damaged. A smear of something dark appeared along the edge of the door, where the frame met the panel. It could have been rain. It could have been mud. Mr. White knew, with sick certainty, it was not rain. Mrs. White screamed, not in fear, but in command. "Herbert," she cried, "wait, I am coming. I am coming." Mr. White stumbled backward, his eyes wide, his chest tight. His gaze darted across the room like a trapped animal. The lamp light made everything too clear. The kettle on the hearth, the chairs, the side table drawer, the monkey's paw. He moved toward it as if pulled. His fingers fumbled the drawer open. The cloth was there, the paw inside. One finger still extended, as if ready to count down. Mrs. White still fought with the bolt. The knocking grew frantic now, as if whatever was outside sensed the door giving way. The breath rasped louder, wet and hungry. Mr. White snatched the paw and held it tight. His whole body shook. He could barely speak. But he knew there was only one thing left to do. There was only one wish left, and it was the most terrible kind of wish. Not for money, not for life, not for happiness. A wish for absence. He turned his head and saw Mrs. White finally wrench the last bolt loose. Her hand went to the handle. The door began to open. A gap appeared. A thin line of night. Cold air poured in, carrying a smell that did not belong to weather. It smelled like turned soil. It smelled like old meat. Mr. White squeezed the paw so hard the brittle skin crackled. He whispered, with a voice that felt like it came from somewhere outside his own body, "I wish it away." The moment the words left him, the knocking stopped. The silence was so sudden it felt like a slap. Mrs. White froze with the door half open. Her face was twisted in anticipation, ready to bloom into joy. But the joy had nowhere to go. She yanked the door wide. The porch was empty. The night wind rolled in, stirring leaves and rainwater, innocent and cold. The path lay slick under the moonless sky. The gate at the end of the garden swayed gently. There were no footprints that Mr. White could see, though the stones glistened, and in the thin lamplight, the wet could have been anything. Mrs. White stared into the darkness, as if her eyes could force a body to appear. Her mouth opened. A sound came out, thin and broken. Then she began to scream. It was not a scream of shock. It was the scream of a mother whose hope has been ripped out by the roots. It rose and rose until it seemed the walls might crack. She stumbled forward onto the porch, calling Herbert's name into the empty night, as if the name could pull him back from wherever he had been snatched. Mr. White stood behind her in the doorway, the monkey's paw limp in his hand again, all fingers curled, satisfied, quiet. He could not comfort her. There are no words for a wound like that. There is only the knowledge that you have invited something into your home, and it has taken what it wanted, and it has left you with your own voice echoing in the dark. The days that followed were worse than the days after Herbert's death, because now there was an added horror threaded through every memory. Not only had Herbert died, not only had his parents paid for money with a son's life, they had also tried to drag him back, and whatever answered had come close enough to touch their door. They did not speak of it to anyone. People would have thought them mad. People would have asked what they meant by knocking, by breathing, by wishing. People would have offered sympathy that could not reach the true shape of what had happened. The money sat in Mr. White's pocket like a weight. When he finally spent it, it felt like spending blood. Every coin seemed to clink with Herbert's laughter, now gone. Mrs. White grew quiet in a way that frightened Mr. White more than her screams. Some grief is loud. Some grief becomes a room you cannot leave. She moved through the house like a ghost, learning its roots. Sometimes she would stop at the door and stare at the bolts as if she expected them to tremble. Mr. White could not forget the smell on that wind through the opening door. He could not forget the way the knocking had changed, from human to something softer and wrong. He could not forget the instant silence after his final wish, as if the world itself had exhaled in relief. He tried to get rid of the monkey's paw again. Once he carried it to the fire and held it over the flames. But his hand shook, and the fear rose in him that burning it would not end it, only anger it. He wrapped it in cloth and buried it at the far edge of the garden beneath a stone. And still, he did not sleep well, because some nights, when the wind came from the right direction, and the rain tapped the windows in that old familiar rhythm, he would wake and listen, not for Herbert, for the sound of something that did not belong, for the slow, heavy step, for the dragging pause, for the thought creeping through his mind like a cold finger, that the paw had not granted wishes in the way people imagine. It had not created money. It had not restored life. It had only rearranged the suffering already waiting in the world, nudging it, shaping it, making sure it landed where it could hurt the most. And in the blackest part of those sleepless nights, Mr. White would wonder about the fakir, the one who claimed fate ruled all things. He would wonder if the fakir had been trying to teach a lesson, or if he had simply been bored and cruel. He would wonder how many hands the paw had passed through before it reached Morris, before it reached the Whites, before it would someday reach someone else. Because objects like that do not disappear easily. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they leave a house by being carried, carefully wrapped, by a man who tells himself he is only moving it, only hiding it, only keeping others safe. And then, one day, when the rain is hard and the wind is restless, and someone knocks at the door with 3 familiar knocks, the object will find a new table, a new lamplight, a new family laughing by the fire, and the wishes will begin again. The monkey's paw is not just about a cursed object. It is about the part of us that reaches, the part of us that believes wanting something hard enough can justify the cost. It is about how quickly we accept bargains when we think we can control the terms. So tonight, as you turn off the lights, remember something simple. There are knocks you should not answer. There are gifts you should not accept. And there are wishes that are only another word for grief. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story and you want more, please like the video and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me what your first wish would be and whether you would dare make it if someone placed that dried, curled paw on your table. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold